Did you know that more than 158 million people worldwide are estimated to have lived inside a toxic relationship with a narcissist or manipulator? That's not just a number. It means families torn apart, careers destroyed, and lives quietly suffocated under the weight of control. Psychologists estimate that 1 in 6 people will experience a toxic couple dynamic marked by narcissistic abuse at least once in their lifetime. That could be your colleague, your best friend, or even you. And here's the disturbing truth. Studies show that victims of a perverse narcissique often take 7 attempts before they finally leave. 7. Imagine the cycle of hope, betrayal, and despair repeated again and again. This is not weakness. It's neuroscience, it's manipulation, it's the invisible prison of the narcissist's game. When you hear words like manipulator, couple toxique, or relation toxique, you might think of extreme cases. But the reality is far more subtle and far more common. And once you recognize the signs, you'll see them everywhere. In workplaces, friendships, families, even in yourself. So if what I'm about to reveal speaks to you, even a little, do me a favor. Make a sign. Like this video, share it, write thank you in the comments, or subscribe. Because it changes everything for what comes next. Carl Jung once said that the meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. When we talk about narcissism, this shadow does not only belong to the narcissist, but also to the people who are caught in their orbit. Sigmund Freud, who first used the term narcissism in 1914, described it as a form of self-love so intense that it devours reality itself. More than a century later, modern psychology confirms what Jung and Freud had sensed. Narcissism is not rare, it is woven into our culture. Studies from the American Psychiatric Association estimate that around 6% of the population meets the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. That sounds small, but it means that out of every 100 people you meet, 6 may show traits that can destabilize you, manipulate you, and reshape your sense of self without you even realizing it. History offers brutal examples. Roman Emperor Nero, intoxicated by his own glory, executed his own mother and nearly burned down Rome just to build his golden palace. He needed constant admiration and punished those who failed to provide it. Thousands of years later, leaders with the same traits still rise, seducing nations with charisma while feeding on the blind devotion of their followers. This shows us that narcissism is not just an individual pathology, but a force that can bend entire societies. When you recognize this, you start to see that your personal struggle with a narcissistic boss, partner, or friend is part of a much bigger pattern. But here is where the tension begins. Why do you keep feeling drawn back into their world, even when you know something is wrong? Neuroscience offers part of the answer. Brain imaging studies show that narcissists trigger powerful dopamine responses in others because of their charm, confidence, and ability to mirror your desires. It feels intoxicating, like a drug. A study from the University of Michigan found that people exposed to narcissistic personalities reported both higher excitement and higher anxiety. This paradox is the trap. They give you a sense of importance, then take it away, leaving you craving more. It is the same cycle that keeps people in toxic relationships for years. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, warned against those who profit from your admiration but poison your peace. His words still echo today, because interacting with a narcissist often feels like being pulled into a performance where you are both audience and victim. You might think that by pleasing them, you'll find stability, but psychology shows otherwise. Research has revealed that relationships with narcissists are statistically shorter, filled with more conflict, and leave deeper scars of self-doubt. What most people don't realize is that narcissism wears many masks. Not all narcissists are loud, arrogant, or visibly grandiose. Some are what psychologists call covert narcissists, quiet, fragile, but equally manipulative. They might present themselves as victims, as misunderstood geniuses, as people who simply need your help. This is where many fall into the trap, because compassion is weaponized. Carl Jung believed that what we do not make conscious will control us from the shadows. If you don't recognize these hidden faces, you become part of their stage, repeating roles that were written long before you arrived. You may already be wondering, how do I know if I am dealing with one? The answer is not always clear, because narcissism exists on a spectrum. A colleague who constantly interrupts may not be dangerous, but a partner who isolates you from friends while demanding absolute loyalty is something else entirely. The diagnostic and statistical manual lists traits like lack of empathy, grandiosity, and exploitation, but even without a clinical label, the damage can be real. The moment you feel drained, silenced, or erased in someone's presence, you are likely facing the shadow of narcissism. And yet, here lies another paradox. Narcissists often rise to positions of power because their confidence can be mistaken for competence. Harvard Business Review once reported that companies led by narcissistic CEOs experienced higher short-term gains, but often collapsed in the long run due to reckless decisions. This mirrors personal relationships as well, at first thrilling but later destructive. You are not alone in this struggle. Famous figures like Princess Diana describe the isolation and emotional exhaustion of living with a narcissistic partner. Modern surveys show that more than 50% of people who leave a narcissistic relationship report symptoms of post-traumatic stress. This is not just about difficult personalities. It is about psychological wounds that can take years to heal. The hidden faces of narcissism are everywhere, in the office, in politics, in friendships, even in families. Recognizing them is the first step, but knowledge alone is not enough. You must learn how to navigate these encounters without losing yourself. That is where psychology, history, and philosophy converge. Jung gives us the language of the shadow. Freud shows us the roots of desire. Neuroscience explains the chemical hooks, and the Stoics remind us that freedom lies in detachment and clarity. This is not just theory, it is a survival map. And as we unfold it step by step, you will see how to escape the cycle, how to interact without being consumed, and how to turn what feels like poison into wisdom that transforms you. Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you wonder why you keep being drawn to narcissists, despite the pain they cause, it is not simply weakness or bad luck. It is your shadow at work. Freud described the repetition compulsion, the tendency of humans to unconsciously repeat patterns of suffering, as if returning to the wound in order to heal it. Jung took it further, showing that the shadow, those denied, unaccepted parts of ourselves, often shows up in the people we meet. And narcissists, perhaps more than anyone else, have a way of embodying exactly what we refuse to see in ourselves. You might think you despise arrogance, yet you find yourself fascinated by the narcissist's certainty. You may hate manipulation, yet you secretly envy the power it gives them. Neuroscience confirms that our brains are wired to pay attention to dominance. Studies show that humans unconsciously rate highly confident individuals as more attractive and more trustworthy, even when evidence proves the opposite. This means that, biologically, we are primed to be seduced by the very traits that will later harm us. But there is a deeper pull. Jung believed that each encounter with a narcissist reflects something inside us. If you feel powerless in their presence, it may mirror the parts of yourself you have abandoned, your own authority, your own voice. If you feel invisible, it may point to childhood wounds where love was conditional. Modern psychology supports this. Research from attachment theory shows that people who grew up with inconsistent caregiving are more likely to fall into relationships with narcissists. They are reenacting, without realizing it, the old struggle of trying to earn love that is always withheld. This is why logic alone is not enough to break free. You can list their flaws, you can swear to never answer their calls again, and yet one message from them reopens the cycle. Jung would say it is because you are not fighting the narcissist, you are fighting your own shadow projected onto them. Marcus Aurelius, though living centuries earlier, understood the same dynamic. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, he wrote. If you constantly direct your thoughts toward the narcissist, analyzing them, resenting them, or trying to change them, you are painting your soul with their colors. So why does this matter? Because once you realize that the pull is not only about them, but also about you, the path to freedom becomes clearer. Carl Jung's patients often discovered that the narcissistic figure in their life embodied something they had disowned. A woman tormented by a controlling partner realized she had long suppressed her own desire for control. By facing it, by admitting it belonged to her, she stopped being hypnotized by him. In neuroscience terms, she rewired the reward circuits in her brain. The dopamine rush she once associated with his attention became less powerful because she no longer needed him to activate it. Freud called this process working through. It means that each time you face the trap, you can learn instead of repeat. But that requires brutal honesty. Ask yourself, why do I stay when I know I should leave? Why do I answer their call when I swore I wouldn't? Often, the answer is that the narcissist awakens both the best and worst in you. They mirror back your hunger for recognition, your longing for power, your fear of rejection. And until you face these within yourself, you will keep falling. Epictetus once said, "You may fetter my leg, but my will not even Zeus himself can overpower. That is the essence of interacting with narcissists, reclaiming the will. Because if you see them only as monsters, you miss the lesson. But if you see them as mirrors, you can learn what your shadow is hiding. Modern therapy echoes this truth. Trauma specialists like Bessel van der Kolk show that healing does not come from avoiding triggers, but from integrating what they awaken inside us. This does not mean excusing the narcissist's behavior. It means you stop giving them the power to define you. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your unclaimed potential. The narcissist, paradoxically, helps reveal it. When you are drawn to their charm, perhaps it is your own charisma asking to be expressed. When you are enraged by their manipulation, perhaps it is your own fear of being assertive that begs to be faced. The trap is powerful because it is not only external, it is internal. Jung saw this as the great paradox of life. We are both victim and accomplice in our suffering. But he also saw the way out. By confronting the shadow, you stop being its prisoner. And once you begin to see the narcissist not as an enigma, but as a projection, their power begins to crumble. The spell breaks, and with it, the cycle that once felt like destiny reveals itself for what it truly is, a lesson in disguise. Why is it that even when you know a narcissist is lying, you still feel pulled toward their words? Why do intelligent, self-aware people, leaders, artists, even therapists, fall under the same spell? The answer is not only psychological, it is neurological. Narcissists don't just manipulate your thoughts, they hijack the very circuits of your brain. Neuroscience has shown that human beings are wired to respond to confidence more than accuracy. In 2015, researchers at the University of California discovered that people consistently trusted individuals who spoke with certainty, even when their information was wrong. Narcissists thrive on this bias. Their inflated confidence activates your brain's reward system, especially the striatum, the same region triggered when you win money or receive praise. Simply put, being in their presence can feel like a dopamine hit. This is why you laugh at their jokes even when they are cruel, why you forgive their betrayals even when they are obvious. Your brain confuses their intensity with safety. But the trap goes deeper. A study published in Nature Neuroscience revealed how unpredictability creates the strongest dopamine spikes. Narcissists are masters of unpredictability. One moment they praise you, the next they humiliate you. This intermittent reinforcement mirrors the mechanics of slot machines. You keep pulling the lever because you might win. You keep answering their texts because maybe, just maybe, this time they will love you. In fact, MRI scans show that the brain responds more intensely to uncertain rewards than to guaranteed ones. That's why their hot and cold behavior doesn't push you away, it glues you tighter. Freud described this cycle long before the machines of neuroscience confirmed it. He observed that people return obsessively to relationships that wound them, calling it the compulsion to repeat. Today, brain scans prove him right. Trauma survivors often show heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, but reduced regulation in the prefrontal cortex. This means logic is overridden by fear and craving. Narcissists unconsciously exploit this imbalance. They flood your nervous system with stress, then offer themselves as the relief. They become both poison and cure. Carl Jung would call this the archetype of the trickster, the figure who destabilizes reality, confuses perception, and thrives in chaos. The narcissist's charm is not just a personality quirk, it is a neurological strategy. By keeping your nervous system oscillating between hope and fear, they ensure that your attention remains locked on them. Marcus Aurelius warned about such figures when he wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If your thoughts are constantly consumed by deciphering a narcissist, your very soul begins to reflect their turbulence. And yet, here lies the critical truth. Once you understand the neuroscience of manipulation, the spell weakens. A study at Stanford University showed that when participants became aware of how variable rewards manipulate the brain, their susceptibility to them decreased. Awareness literally rewires circuits. This means that simply by naming the pattern, love bombing, gaslighting, withdrawal, you begin to reclaim your autonomy. Real-life testimonies echo this. Survivors often describe the moment they broke free as a moment of clarity, as if a fog lifted. They suddenly saw the narcissist's behavior not as personal, but as patterned. The neuroscience supports this. When the prefrontal cortex reactivates through reflection, therapy, or mindfulness, the emotional grip of the amygdala loosens. Seneca, without ever hearing of neural circuits, said the same in different words. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. The narcissist thrives when you mistake the storm in your nervous system for truth. But you must also understand the danger. Long-term exposure to narcissistic abuse can alter the brain itself. Chronic stress shrinks the hippocampus, the region tied to memory and learning, while enlarging the amygdala, making you hyperreactive to threats. This is why people trapped in narcissistic relationships often say they no longer recognize themselves. It is not only metaphor, it is biology. Your brain has been sculpted by their manipulation. And yet, biology is not destiny. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, means recovery is always possible. Practices like meditation, journaling, or therapy strengthen the prefrontal cortex and calm the amygdala. Modern research shows that survivors who engage in self-reflection and community support restore balance in their nervous system faster than those who isolate. Jung might call this integration, reclaiming the fragmented self that the narcissist once exploited. So when you feel the pull, when you wonder why you can't just walk away, remember, it is not just you. It is your nervous system caught in a trap designed by evolution and exploited by manipulation. But once you see the mechanism, once you name the trick, the power shifts. The narcissist ceases to be a mysterious sorcerer and becomes what they truly are, a fragile figure using predictable strategies. And that realization is the first step toward breaking free. Carl Jung wrote that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is. This is where narcissism becomes dangerously deceptive. Narcissists rarely present themselves as villains. They wear masks, sometimes dazzling, sometimes fragile, that conceal their hunger for control. To survive, you must learn to recognize these masks before they consume you. And here is the challenge. The masks are convincing because they mirror your own needs and expectations. The first mask is charm. Studies in social psychology show that within the first 30 seconds of meeting someone, people form lasting impressions. Narcissists exploit this window with laser precision. They compliment you, they mirror your values, they make you feel seen in a way that feels almost mystical. Neuroscience reveals why it works. Praise activates the same brain regions as receiving money. You feel wealthier in their presence, as though you've stumbled upon a rare treasure. But it is not treasure, it is bait. Another mask is vulnerability. Not all narcissists are loud and grandiose. Some present themselves as victims of a cruel world. They share stories of betrayal, injustice, or being misunderstood. You feel compassion, and your instinct is to protect them. But as psychiatrist Craig Malkin warns, this covert narcissism is just as manipulative. Instead of demanding admiration directly, they pull it from you through pity. Jung would call this the wounded healer archetype turned dark, the appearance of fragility masking a deep desire for control. Then comes the mask of superiority. In the workplace, you see it in the colleague who dominates meetings, dismisses others' ideas, yet somehow gets promoted. Harvard Business Review found that narcissistic leaders are more likely to rise quickly, but their teams suffer higher turnover. Why? Because superiority is contagious. People confuse arrogance with competence, and by the time the damage becomes clear, it is often too late. Marcus Aurelius warned of this illusion when he said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." The narcissist thrives on blurring that line. A more insidious mask is generosity. They shower you with gifts, favors, or sudden acts of kindness. It feels like love, but Seneca reminds us, nothing is more ruinous than the gift of an enemy. This generosity often carries invisible strings. Every favor becomes a debt, every kindness a chain. Survivors often describe how they felt trapped not by cruelty, but by obligation. It is difficult to confront someone who once paid your rent or praised your achievements, and the narcissist knows this. Their mask of generosity becomes a fortress around their manipulation. The final mask is normalcy. Not every narcissist is flamboyant. Some blend in, quietly eroding your confidence with subtle digs, backhanded compliments, or silent treatment. Psychologists call this low-key narcissism. It is harder to detect because it feels like ordinary conflict. But over time, you notice a pattern. You always walk away feeling smaller, more uncertain, less yourself. Jung warned that the most dangerous things are those we do not see. This mask of normalcy is precisely what makes it effective. So how do you know when you're facing the mask instead of the truth? Science gives us clues. Studies on microexpressions show that people can fake smiles, but fleeting flashes of contempt, raised corners of the lip, narrowed eyes, leak through unconsciously. Narcissists cannot hide their disdain forever. Another sign is the energy you feel after leaving them. Healthy relationships leave you nourished. With narcissists, you feel drained, as though your very life force has been siphoned. This is not metaphor. Research on emotional contagion shows that our nervous systems sync with those around us. When someone lives in constant self-absorption, your body unconsciously carries their tension. But recognizing the mask is only the beginning. What matters is what you do next. Jung believed that once you name a thing, you strip it of its unconscious power. When you say, "This is not generosity, this is control," the spell weakens. When you think, "This is not intimacy, this is manipulation," the fog clears. Marcus Aurelius advised, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Applying this to narcissists means refusing to play along with the theater of masks. And yet, you must tread carefully. Confronting the mask directly often provokes rage. Narcissists react violently when their illusion shatters. This is why psychologists recommend gray rocking, responding with emotional flatness, denying them the fuel of reaction. Neuroscience backs this up. When you stop rewarding their behavior with attention, their brain's dopamine cycle collapses. The mask begins to slip. Recognizing the masks is not about labeling others as monsters. It is about preserving your sanity. Every mask hides the same emptiness, a void of self that the narcissist cannot face. Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." The narcissist's masks are proof of this. But you, unlike them, have the chance to see clearly. To unmask is to awaken. And once you see the faces for what they are, you can finally decide whether you want to keep playing their game or step off the stage entirely. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Now imagine placing this Stoic wisdom against the chaos of a narcissist. Where they thrive on pulling you into storms, Stoicism teaches you to become the calm eye within it. And that contrast, chaos versus clarity, can determine whether you remain enslaved to their drama or free within your own soul. Narcissists crave control. They feed on your reactions, anger, tears, even admiration. Neuroscientists call this emotional contagion. The limbic system in your brain mirrors the emotions of those around you. That's why after a heated argument, you feel shaky long after it ends. But here lies the Stoic weapon, detachment. When Marcus Aurelius trained himself to pause before reacting, he wasn't suppressing emotions, he was rewiring his nervous system. Modern studies show that practices like cognitive reframing, which the Stoics mastered centuries ago, reduce amygdala activity and increase prefrontal control. In simple terms, Stoicism strengthens the very circuits that narcissists try to hijack. Seneca warned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Think of gaslighting, one of the narcissist's favorite tools. They twist facts until you question your own memory. Yet the Stoic response is not to argue endlessly, but to anchor yourself in reason. Journaling, a practice Marcus Aurelius himself used nightly, helps you see patterns that narcissists want you to forget. Psychologists confirm that writing down experiences strengthens hippocampal encoding, making it harder for others to rewrite your reality. In other words, what the Stoics practiced as philosophy, neuroscience now proves as resilience. Epictetus, once a slave who became one of history's greatest Stoic teachers, insisted, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters." Narcissists weaponize your reactions. They provoke shame, then feed on your defensiveness. They provoke anger, then call you unstable. But when you refuse to react, when you practice the Stoic art of indifference, you starve them. This is not weakness, it is strategy. Research on power dynamics shows that those who control their emotions in conflict are perceived as stronger and more competent. Narcissists, ironically, often collapse when faced with someone they cannot manipulate. There's also the lesson of perspective. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself daily of the vastness of the universe, the fleeting nature of fame, the smallness of human quarrels. For him, remembering mortality was liberation. Compare this to the narcissist, who clings desperately to admiration, terrified of insignificance. Their chaos comes from denial of mortality, while Stoic peace comes from acceptance of it. Neuroscience calls this existential acceptance. Studies show that people who confront death mindfully experience less anxiety and are harder to manipulate. By holding on to perspective, you deny the narcissist their power to make you feel small. But perhaps the most profound Stoic counter to narcissism is self-mastery. Narcissists depend on your lack of boundaries. They exploit your hunger for approval, your fear of rejection. Seneca once wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." Without a clear sense of self, you drift into the narcissist's storm. But with self-mastery, you become the captain. Modern psychology agrees. Boundary setting has been shown to reduce cortisol levels in people exposed to toxic relationships. Every time you say no with clarity, your brain rewards you with serotonin and dopamine, internal affirmations that strengthen resilience. We can see this even in history. While Nero, a man consumed by narcissism, burned through his empire, Seneca, his advisor, retreated into inner freedom. He could not control the emperor's madness, but he could control his own mind. His writings, composed under threat of death, still outlive the empire Nero once glorified. This is the Stoic paradox. The narcissist may seem powerful in the moment, but the one who rules himself rules forever. And so the lessons converge. Marcus Aurelius teaches detachment, Epictetus teaches control of reaction, Seneca teaches clarity of purpose. Together, they form a shield against narcissistic chaos. They remind us that freedom is not found in changing others, but in governing ourselves. Psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience all agree. When you strengthen your inner fortress, the narcissist's weapons turn blunt. In the end, Stoicism does not promise to remove narcissists from your life. They will always exist, at work, in politics, even in families. But Stoicism does promise that their chaos does not have to enter you, and that is the ultimate victory, to stand in the middle of their storm and remain untouched, not because the storm is weak, but because you have become stronger than the storm itself. Why is it so hard to break free from a narcissist's orbit, even when you know the relationship is toxic? You've seen the chaos, you've felt the exhaustion, you've even promised yourself, never again. And yet, you find yourself drawn back, answering messages, forgiving betrayals, repeating patterns. Carl Jung would say this is the psyche repeating what it has not yet integrated. Freud called it the compulsion to repeat. Modern neuroscience calls it reinforcement learning. Whatever the name, the cycle is real, and breaking it requires both awareness and strategy. One of the first strategies is recognizing the cycle itself. Psychologists describe narcissistic relationships as operating on a three-stage loop: idealization, devaluation, and discard. At first, you are placed on a pedestal, showered with admiration. Then comes the slow erosion, criticism, gaslighting, subtle digs. Finally, the discard, emotional withdrawal, abandonment, or even humiliation. What keeps you trapped is the hope of returning to the idealization stage. But as trauma expert Judith Herman explains, what was once the exception becomes the rule. The pedestal was never real, it was bait. Realizing this is like pulling back a curtain. You stop longing for a paradise that never existed. The second strategy is boundary setting, which may sound simple, but is psychologically revolutionary. Boundaries are kryptonite to narcissists because they expose the limits of their control. Research shows that individuals who practice assertiveness training experience significant decreases in cortisol, the stress hormone. Every time you say no, every time you refuse to justify yourself, you rewire your nervous system. You teach your brain that safety lies not in appeasing them, but in protecting yourself. Marcus Aurelius put it simply: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Boundaries are the living proof of that wisdom. Another essential strategy is gray rocking, responding with emotional flatness, refusing to provide the reactions that narcissists feed on. Imagine trying to start a fire with wet wood. Eventually, the spark dies. Neuroscience supports this. When behavior is no longer rewarded with attention, dopamine pathways weaken. Real-life cases confirm it. Survivors often report that once they stopped providing emotional fuel, the narcissist either escalated briefly or lost interest entirely. The cycle collapsed not because the narcissist changed, but because the victim stopped playing their role in the script. But breaking the cycle is not only about tactics, it's also about healing the wounds that made you vulnerable. Studies show that people with unresolved childhood trauma are disproportionately drawn into narcissistic relationships. This is where therapy, especially trauma-informed therapy, becomes crucial. Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, demonstrated that trauma imprints itself on the body as much as on the mind. Practices like EMDR, somatic experiencing, or even mindfulness meditation allow survivors to release old wounds, reducing the unconscious pull toward narcissists. In Jungian terms, it is shadow work, bringing the unconscious into light so that it stops controlling you. There are also real-life testimonies that prove the possibility of escape. Princess Diana, trapped in a marriage marked by manipulation and betrayal, eventually broke the cycle by reclaiming her own voice and stepping out of the royal system. She paid a price, but she regained her identity. Modern survivors echo this. Once they stepped outside the narcissist's frame, they found themselves rediscovering passions, friendships, even health. Studies reveal that survivors who engage in self-discovery, new hobbies, journaling, community, heal faster and relapse less often. Because the antidote to narcissistic chaos is not only avoidance, it is building a life so rich that manipulation loses its appeal. Yet perhaps the hardest part is the discard stage. Many survivors describe it as unbearable, not because they lost a healthy relationship, but because they lost the illusion of love. Neuroscience again explains why. Withdrawal from a narcissist triggers the same brain regions as drug withdrawal. The craving is real. This is why relapse happens. But like any addiction, recovery begins with understanding the chemistry. Once you see the craving for what it is, a chemical echo, you stop mistaking it for destiny. And so, breaking the cycle is a layered process. Recognize the loop for what it is. Set boundaries that affirm your autonomy. Practice gray rocking to starve manipulation. Heal the childhood wounds that keep you vulnerable. Build a life outside the narcissist's frame. And when the withdrawal comes, remember, it is not love you are missing, but a chemical trap. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." Bravery here means enduring the discomfort of breaking the cycle until freedom returns. Real cases, real neuroscience, ancient wisdom, all point to the same truth: you can break free. It won't be immediate, and it won't be easy, but it is possible. The narcissist thrives on your repetition. Your liberation begins with interruption. And the moment you choose not to repeat, the cycle cracks. That crack is where your new life begins. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." This is the ultimate truth when dealing with narcissists. The pain they cause is undeniable. The gaslighting, the humiliation, the endless cycles of hope and despair, they leave scars. But scars, if you choose, can become symbols of survival. The story does not have to end with brokenness. It can end with transformation, with reclaiming a freedom so deep that no manipulation can touch it again. To begin, you must first allow yourself to grieve. Psychologists emphasize that recovering from narcissistic abuse resembles recovering from bereavement. You are not only mourning the person, you are mourning the illusion, the future you thought you had, the version of yourself you lost. Studies show that people who acknowledge grief recover faster than those who suppress it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't be ashamed of needing help. You have a duty to fulfill just like a soldier on the battlefield." Grieving is not weakness, it is part of your duty to yourself. From grief emerges clarity. When you stop clinging to the hope that the narcissist will change, you redirect energy inward. Here lies the paradox. The very suffering they cause becomes the raw material of growth. Neuroscience calls this post-traumatic growth. Research shows that survivors of deep adversity often develop greater empathy, resilience, and purpose than those who have never suffered. Pain literally rewires the brain, creating stronger pathways of meaning. What felt like destruction becomes, in time, reconstruction. Seneca understood this when he said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." The narcissist's cruelty, though undeserved, becomes an unwelcome teacher. You learn boundaries not as theory, but as survival. You learn detachment not as philosophy, but as necessity. You learn to find your worth not in external validation, but in the quiet, unshakable core within you. This is what the Stoics called apatheia, not indifference to life, but freedom from being controlled by it. Real-life stories affirm this transformation. Consider Viktor Frankl, though not a direct victim of narcissistic abuse, but of one of the darkest systems of human cruelty. In the concentration camps, he discovered that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Survivors of narcissists echo this. Once they realize their inner freedom cannot be stolen, the narcissist's power dissolves. What once felt like chains now becomes evidence of unbreakable will. But how do you translate this into everyday life? Start by reclaiming your voice. Many survivors describe years of silencing, of doubting their perceptions. Therapy, journaling, Even speaking aloud to yourself in the mirror rebuilds the neural pathways of self-trust. Studies show that affirmations of agency activate the prefrontal cortex, restoring rational control over emotions. Each time you declare, "This is what I see, this is what I know," you are rewiring your brain against gaslighting. You must also reclaim joy. Narcissists often drain life of spontaneity, making you walk on eggshells. Reintroducing joy, whether through art, music, nature, or friendship, is not frivolous, it is medicine. Neurochemistry proves it. Play and laughter increase oxytocin and serotonin, hormones that repair trust and emotional regulation. What feels like small acts of joy are in fact profound steps toward healing. Jung would call it individuation, the process of becoming whole again, embracing not only the shadow but also the light. Finally, transformation means turning your story outward. Many survivors find meaning in helping others recognize the patterns they once missed. This is not about revenge, it is about transmutation. Alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold. Here, the lead is the narcissist's poison. The gold is the wisdom you carry forward. Sharing your story, whether with a friend, a community, or even the world, ensures that your pain births light for others. And so the cycle ends, not with destruction, but with transcendence. Freud explained how trauma chains us to repetition, but Jung offered a greater vision. The self is capable of integration, capable of turning wounds into wisdom. The Stoics remind us that freedom is always internal. Neuroscience confirms that the brain can rewire after even the deepest harm. You are not condemned to remain the victim of a narcissist's story. You are the author of your own. The pain they gave you is real, but what you do with it now, that is your power. To transform it, to embody it, to rise above it, is to reclaim freedom so vast that no mask, no lie, no manipulation can ever bind you again. And perhaps this is the greatest secret the narcissist never wanted you to know, that in trying to break you, they forged in you a strength they could never possess.